Dark Knight's Metal was a ton of fun. The 6-issue event, written by Scott Snyder and penciled by Greg Capullo, was literally the most metal comic I ever read. We have Batman cradling baby Darkseid in an attempt to go back in time. We have an armor-clad Batman flailing a sword while riding a Joker dragon. We even have Plastic Man hatching from an egg and becoming a dinosaur bulldozer shark. The whole thing was nuts. But my favorite part of the entire story was in the second issue, when Kendra Saunders name drops Barbatos. Barbatos has a long and confusing history throughout the DC universe. I mean, considering both Grant Morrison and Scott Snyder have worked with the character, that shouldn't come as a surprise. But Barbatos represents one of my favorite aspects of comics: continuity. You see, Barbatos was originally a one-off character who Grant Morrison later weaved into the Batman mythos years later. So when Snyder name-dropped Barbatos in Dark Knight's Metal, the continuity nerd in me got super excited. So today I want to explain the dark and confusing history of the dark multiversal Batdemon, Barbatos. Barbatos was first mentioned in the Dark Knight Dark City storyline from 1990, written by Peter Milligan. The story tells the tale of a group of cultists back in 1765, including Thomas Jefferson for some reason, that tried to summon the Batdemon Barbatos. But in order to control this demon, Jefferson and his pals would have to sacrifice an innocent. So these guys got to work on the ritual, but then Jefferson eventually hesitates to kill the girl, and just before he and the cultists get into an argument, a winged bat creature appears, causing all the men to flee the temple, with the innocent girl still locked inside. Years later, Gotham City would be built over this temple. After the events of that night, one of the cultists writes a confession, which notably contained the ritual to summon Barbatos. Flash forward to Gotham City in the present. The Riddler finds this cultist confession and attempts to summon the Bat God himself, attempting to use Batman as the innocent vessel. So Riddler takes Batman through this convoluted bunch of trials, including Batman fighting zombies and Batman having to cut open a kid's throat to save them from dying. Eventually, the Riddler led Batman to the temple where the cultists originally tried to summon Barbatos. And surprising to both the Riddler and Batman, Barbatos actually started speaking with them. So Batman manages to defeat the Riddler, but Barbatos explains that he was the one who made Bruce Wayne into Batman, so that he could one day release him back into the world. Bruce manages to escape the temple and bury the remains of the girl that the cultists left in the temple. And for a really long time, this was the only mention of Barbatos. But then in 2006, Grant Morrison kicked off his massive Batman run, which pulled from a bunch of old Batman stories, including Dark Knight Dark City. I mean, Morrison literally took the most obscure stuff and made it work. He brought back Batman Zur-En-Arrh, which I don't think anyone was asking for, but somehow made it really cool and interesting. Anyway, one of the main villains from Morrison's run was also revamped from a classic Batman story: Dr. Hurt. Dr. Hurt originally appeared as an unnamed government scientist in Batman number 156 back in 1963. In Morrison's run, he would reveal this character's identity as Thomas Wayne, a shunned ancestor of the Wayne family. You see, Thomas Wayne was one of the cultists who tried to summon Barbatos. When all the other cultists fled in terror, Dr. Hurt stayed behind and the Bat creature entered his body, making him immortal. Well, kinda. You see, the Bat creature that the cultists summoned that night wasn't actually Barbatos. This all ties into the Final Crisis event, which Morrison wrote during his Batman run. In Final Crisis, the world is descending into darkness as Darkseid and the Gods of Apocalypse attempt to unleash the anti-life equation on Earth, which is a mathematical formula proving that life is meaningless. So in order to stop Darkseid, Batman decides to break his no-guns rule and fires a Radion bullet at Darkseid. But at the same time, Darkseid fired his Omega Sanction beams at Bruce, presumably killing him. But it didn't in fact kill Bruce. The Omega Sanction sent Bruce way back in time. So Darkseid sent the Hyper Adapter, which was a beast designed to hunt Bruce and merge with him, making it so that when Bruce arrived at the end of time, he would destroy all of existence. Yeah, it's a little confusing, I know, but that's Grant Morrison for you. So the Bat creature during that night wasn't Barbatos. It was actually the Hyper Adapter weapon that fused with Thomas Wayne. Of course, Batman would go on to defeat his evil ancestor sometime in the future. And that was the end of Barbatos' story. For a while. Okay, so now it's 2017, and Scott Snyder released Dark Knight's Metal, which introduced the proper Barbatos back into the universe, keeping a lot of his history intact, but adding a whole lot more. You see, at the beginning of time, there were three beings. One's role was to monitor over all of matter. Another's task was to monitor over all of antimatter. The third being was known as the Forger, and his role was to use the World Forge to create new worlds. The most successful of these worlds would become the multiverse. But not all worlds were successful, so they had to be destroyed so their energy could transfer back to the World Forge. In order to destroy these unsuccessful worlds, the Forger had his own dragon, and this dragon's name was Barbatos. He wasn't an actual dragon, by the way, that's just kind of the word they use for it. Anyway, Barbatos would eventually kill the Forger, causing all these doomed worlds to form the Dark Multiverse. The worlds in the Dark Multiverse aren't created with the World Forge anymore. They're instead created from the fears of people from the multiverse. These worlds are constantly spawning and dying in a complete state of chaos, unlike the order of the 52 Earths of the multiverse. But Barbatos wanted to sink the multiverse into the Dark Multiverse, resulting in all life consumed by darkness. He eventually traveled to the multiverse in ancient times using Hoth Set, a servant of Hawkman, as his vessel, and started a cult that worshipped him. This cult would later become the Court of Owls, a criminal organization made up of Gotham City's most rich and powerful. They also have an army of zombie assassins. Yeah, they're pretty cool. But Barbatos was eventually damaged by Hawkman's mace, forcing him to return to the Dark Multiverse. While stuck in the Dark Multiverse, he noticed Batman when Bruce traveled back in time due to the Omega Sanction. Because his insignia was so similar to Barbatos's, he decided he would use Bruce as his next vessel to access the multiverse. So in present-day Gotham, the Court of Owls worked to secretly expose Bruce to the 6 metals that would allow Barbatos to travel to the multiverse. Later in Dark Knight's Metal, after Barbatos is unleashed upon the world, he expands on what he told Bruce the night when the Riddler tried to summon him. He explains that the iconic bat that flew through Bruce's window, causing Bruce to become the Batman, was actually Barbatos. He allowed Bruce to become a hero just so he could free him from the Dark Multiverse. Of course, Bruce and the Justice League end up defeating Barbatos and saving the day. And that's the long and complicated history of Barbatos. It was really interesting seeing this character evolve over such long periods of time. I think this kind of long-spanning DC history is part of what makes DC so great. Having these kinds of stories that appear later in other books really gives a heightened sense of stakes to these stories. It's great when writers like Morrison and Snyder really know their DC history. That's also part of why I love Dark Knight's Metal. The entire event was metal as hell, and that's in no small part thanks to Barbatos.